Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Writing Podcast. I'm here, Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with Adam Poe as usual, but he's having some internet connections this week, so he's probably not going to be talking too much. He's just trying to keep the stream live. And we're going to be talking today with actually my editor, Shelley Holloway. And we've got a whole bunch of questions people have been writing in, kind of just wanting some back to basics sort of stuff for maybe they're just getting their first novel ready. And so we're going to pump Shelley for all kinds of information. She sent me a little intro, so I'm going to go ahead and be really professional and just read what she sent me. All right, Shelley Holloway is an editor serving primarily the growing community of indie authors with a concentration on young adult fiction. Most of her clients write fantasy and science fiction, but she also enjoys the work of other clients who write thrillers and romance novels. Prior to starting Holloway House, she had a 15-year career in the advertising and marketing world on the client service side. This was where she ended up being the go-to person for the editing and proofreading of all the materials they created. She later realized her favorite part of the job was just that, editing and proofreading. So 4 years ago, she decided to go out on her own and do it full-time. Shelly and her husband currently live in Atlanta, Georgia, but thanks to the internet, she's able to work with clients from all over the world, including Norway, Canada, and China. And for those of you who aren't watching on the video, Shelley has a very nice house, and I'm probably going to come stay with her when I come to the South.
Who comes to Atlanta? I don't know, but you're always welcome.
All right, thank you. Get the air mattress down in the living room anyway. But okay, so I kind of did your little introduction, but did you want to talk to us kind of how long you've been doing editing for indie authors and sort of what made you choose to go that route instead of, I guess, technical editing and other writing aspects?
Well, probably because I like to read, and I like to work on what I like to read, if I can put it that way. So when I kind of realized that that was what I was doing, it was marketing language and casual language, and it wasn't, I had no interest in really technical or nonfiction or getting into educational books or anything like that. It was something I always did by accident. When I would read, I just naturally correct stuff, whether it's in my head or on paper. I was just always doing that, so I just thought that would be a natural direction, would be the fiction realm. And I really got into the indie stuff when I got my first Kindle, because it was right after I left the advertising and marketing world, because it was 2008 and lots of businesses were closing, and the one I worked for was included. And I thought, well, what do I really want to focus on? And when I picked editing, I thought, well, I don't want to go back to like an office with other people and the salary and all those things. I just wanted to work on my own, and I'd read a couple of books, and I thought, wow, I like these books, but they have so many errors in them. So I didn't really get it. Because I didn't even think for a minute that they wouldn't have editors. I thought, well, of course, everybody has an editor, but then I realized that the indie authors didn't. A lot of times, I realized as I started looking into it and going on Kindle boards and various things like that, that more often than not, the choice was monetary. They didn't think that they could afford it. Most knew they needed one, but they just didn't jump into it for whatever fears they had. So I just started contacting a couple of the authors and giving them the corrections I saw in their books and said, you might want to do these, and by the way, this is what I do if you want to give me a try. And so I would do, the free sample and give them an idea, and that's kind of how I got most of my clients. So.
Right, and I think that I'm actually curious if, in the beginning especially, if you found that indie authors were able to afford kind of the typical editor, or, because I see a lot of posts on keyboards like, well, I pay my editor $200 for a 100,000-word manuscript, and I'm like, I totally get not having the money, right? But at the same time, as somebody who used to do critique group, I'm like, I know how much work goes into, especially a really new author. That's just insane amount of work can be.
Right, exactly. And so I really struggled with how to address that, because there are people out there who offer for $300, they'll read it and read it twice. I'm like, you can't even just pleasure read that twice for $300. I thought, do they have a magic button that I don't have on my computer that just lets them, correct everything? Because it's a matter of time. and the quality of that time. And I try to explain that to everybody new and give them a range and tell them what they can expect from me. I don't discount the fact that other editors are out there able to somehow do it for less. I just say that's not me. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they put human eyes on it, you know, and read word for word. I can't. So.
Right. Yeah, it's tough when you've got people willing to do it for so little, but at the same time, often you get what you pay for. So I think it's important for, yeah. Because I remember when I did content editing and content writing, I had my own websites, and people would offer to write these 500-word articles for $5 an article. I'm like, that has to at least, even if you're really whipping it out, that's at least, if you're doing any research, that takes a half hour or an hour, and that's a pretty crummy wage. So.
Yeah. That's what I just try to impress upon anybody new who's not familiar with it is the aspect of the time that it takes. And you put a value on that time, and it's clean and simple, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Do you find that you get more repeat authors that are actually, have made a business of it and are able to afford to have a book edited every few months or however often they publish?
You are my most prolific author, if I'm allowed to say that.
I'm shocked. I'm totally shocked.
But yes, I do have repeat authors, which is really nice because I don't market myself. You are my biggest marketer, if I were to be completely honest, because of how many people go to your website and see my name, and that's how I've gotten a lot of my clients. It's really wonderful. And then once they find me, it's my responsibility to keep them, and luckily I've been able to do that. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm glad to send you business, but just remember, you need to keep a slot open for me probably every month. So.
Apparently.
Especially now with the pen name stuff. But yeah, Adam was wondering, do you charge by the hour then, or do you kind of go by word count, or does it depend?
I do, and I explain this to new clients so that they get a sense of it, because you go and look at probably most authors either charge by the page or the word. And you can't really charge by the page because everybody puts, is it double space, is it single space? So you have to put parameters on that. It gets a little confusing. I present my general range in a per word, like 1 cent, 3.5 cents, whatever it is based upon the level of editing. But I track my time the entire way, and at the end of a job, I know exactly how many hours I've used, and depending upon the type of editing involved, the level of editing, is it proofreading or is it more substantive editing, I place a different hourly rate on whatever those hours are. It's really just my way of spot checking it, because I tell a client it's going to be 2 cents a word based upon this scope of work, and it's almost always exactly that, because I kind of tracked it my first year or so to see how much time I took, and then placed a value on it and said, am I making that money? And based upon the percent rates that I was doing, it was pretty much spot on, which I found interesting. So yes, I do a percent per word price to them, and I say that includes one full edit, one full round of a full track changes edit, and one what I call a cleanup round. And if it goes beyond that, then there's an understanding that if it kind of jumps too far out of the original budget, then we'll address it. It's never a problem, because it's just the open communication of what's going on. So.
Okay, and could you tell us what's involved with the different types of editing you do, whether it's kind of the line editing or more the developmental sort of stuff?
It's funny because I was looking at your website the other day, and you wrote an article about the types of editing, kind of helping new readers understand what they're buying. And you listed the stuff about developmental editing, and I even wrote it down somewhere. I just looked on a webcast.
That's an old article, so if it's all off, then that's time.
No. It listed, narrative, flow, consistency, logic, story, and character development. And those are things that happen, kind of when you're still grinding through the story, right, before you've gotten it to where you think you're done. I tend to get them when they're done. I'm not a developmental editor. Um, and I don't necessarily label what I do for the, like when someone says, they'll write and say, I don't really know what level editing I need. I'm like, that's okay. I don't label the editing that I give you. I give you a sample edit and I show you the sorts of things that I tackle. And that way I'm not constrained by, I priced this as X. You know, that's why it gets confusing. But when I do a sample edit, I time how much time it took me to do the chapter or whatever it is I did, and I kind of extrapolate that. And that ends up being how I price it, because I might make comments about a character. I might show where they've been really inconsistent in something, or this is a really bumpy area that doesn't seem to tie to this other section. So it goes all over the map. It isn't just proofreading. It isn't just line editing. It isn't developmental editing. But I think I do sometimes, particularly with newer authors who need a bit more polish than the work that I get from you, for instance, because your stuff is really so polished when I get it. You know, there's just more to get my teeth into. So I explain that in the email. I don't label it. It's really kind of the point.
Okay. Do you ever find yourself like turning away a manuscript and just kind of telling them, you know, you're probably not ready for me yet? Here's a developmental editor in your genre that you should look for?
You know, I wish I had go-to people for that. I really don't. I have pushed back because one of my standard, I give a set of questions when I've gotten an inquiry, and I'll give them a lot of information, but I'll also ask questions to get a sense of what their experience level is. And one of my questions is, do you use beta readers? And another one is, you know, have they used an editor before? Do they belong to a workshop or a critique group? Because if they haven't let anybody else see the light of day, am I supposed to be reading what's on my screen? I don't know.
No. Adam's throwing out some questions for me to ask you if you're not on my list.
We can talk at the same time.
No, that's okay. I'm barely paying attention to me either. Sorry, Adam.
If they don't have those things, I think they're sending me their work too soon. And so I do push back, and I just say, I really encourage you to do this. And then if they do, that's great. You know, they go away for a couple of months and I get it later. If they don't, then I get something that just is more work for me. And I like that work. You know, I like getting into it at that stage. But I think they could save money if they would take advantage of beta readers and workshops.
Right, and I'll actually tell people when they ask me, you know, I'll say as an independent author, if you're self-publishing, you probably cannot afford developmental editing unless you have a really good day job.
Right.
So you need to like take classes, be in a critique group, do something to really kind of get the craft rules down before you approach an editor. I mean, I've seen people do it, but it costs like $3,000 or $4,000, and I'm like, well, if you have the money, go for it. But most of us starting out do not.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. And I think I've held on to most of the people to whom I've given that information, and maybe they weren't able to do it on that particular piece, but they've gone out and attempted to find those people. I'm sure I know you give this advice on your website, but I think most don't know where to turn. You know, how do you find those beta readers? And if you don't have workshops in your hometown where you can go face to face, how do these new people go and find that? And I think that's a challenge.
Right, and it's great now that the internet is a thing, because even if you live in, you know, in my town or a smaller town, hey, we have a Walmart. This is not that small of a town. But, you know, that's what I did. And even if some people, like when you're an introvert, which is a lot of writers, you're not comfortable with actually going to a person-to-person critique group. But
Right.
if you look in your genre, there's probably something out there. I used to be a part of critters.org, is science fiction and fantasy.
I remember you noted that on your website.
Yeah, and then that one's free. And then there's the science fiction and fantasy online writing workshop. I think that one's like $60 a year, but it's you know, it's worth investing. And you'll find other people that, I always say other writers are the hardest audience to please, because they also have that editing hat on and they're also learning all the rules. So if you can get them to like your stuff, you know, it's probably pretty good by the time you run it through the mill there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that's very true.
You mentioned in your little bio that you like science fiction and fantasy, and I think YA fantasy. Do you find any challenges with editing specific genres, or does it take longer sometimes for, I don't know if you ever get techie sci-fi stuff or.
I don't get anything too sci-fi. And, I never read fantasy and stuff like that is my go-to kind of fiction. You were really the person who turned me on to that kind of storytelling. And now I really love it. And because of you, that's the type of clientele I attract, so I was getting a broader and broader I guess, immersion into all of it. And there were definitely some words and some language that I didn't know at first, so I just had to do a little bit of research or question the words when it first started. I haven't been challenged with anything so out there that I, number one, had to turn away the work, or number two, had to look really stupid and just ask the questions like, what the heck are you talking about? That hasn't happened yet.
All right, that's good to hear. And Adam wanted to add that Critique Circle is another group where you can find beta readers, and it's free. And he says that you're required to critique other people's work in exchange, and that's how most of them I found.
Yeah. And that's how it should work. I mean, you can't just get out there and get free readers all the time.
And it's a great learning experience. I think I've learned more by critiquing other people's work and seeing, like, why isn't this working for me, kind of trying to analyze it, than just by having my own stuff done.
I think that would be really interesting to have my work, I mean, from a contemporary, to have a contemporary give you that kind of feedback, someone, be it in your genre or just another writer. I do have to say, and this was a little odd when I was first going on Kindle boards and things like that, I would never label myself as a creative writer. Do I know how to write? Sure. I can write effective communication, but I do not call myself a writer. And there are writers out there who are also editors who don't believe you can be an editor unless you're a writer, which I found really surprising. But I definitely had that feedback when I was on those boards. I read those sorts of comments. So, I mean, there's something for everybody, I guess. There are a lot of editors out there, and you just have to find the one that fits. I think that's a huge component of a relationship. So,
I think there are definitely writers who are editors too. I find that as a more creative person, I have a hard time sometimes if the rules, for the grammar rules and everything, aren't totally ingrained in my brain from like when I was a kid. As you know, there's still stuff that when I'm just writing along and I'm totally in the story, I'll often use like homonyms or just the wrong lay or laid. I have to really, I don't know, I find them two different sides of the brain, and sometimes they don't always come together perfectly. So I could totally see being an analytical editor type of person without necessarily wanting to write stories of your own.
Right. Right. But it is two different hats. You can't have both hats on at the same time. You might be able to take your writing hat off and go back and try and edit your work. You can't be doing both at once. It would.
Right, and I find so many, and I had the same arrogance. I was like, oh, my stuff's been through a critique group. It's perfectly clean. I'm sure the editor will only find a few typos. And I'm always shocked at how much gets through. I'm like, gosh, I read that 3 times, and there's horrible mismatched words, and you know how it is.
It is, but also it's that way even after I look at it or any editor looks at it. We all know they're not perfect. They get out there and they have errors, and God bless ebooks because you can go back and fix them. But it's a human condition, So we're gonna slip things through, but you can only do what you can do.
Yeah, and as an independent author too, I think it's important to realize that traditionally published books, not only do they sometimes have errors slip through, especially nowadays, I think they've really cut back. But those are manuscripts that have gone through multiple editors. Mm-hmm. So we usually have to do the best we can. Maybe we have one editor, we have our beta readers, and I've started doing like sending out early copies to readers that are enthused with the series, and then they'll proofread it, and if they find something, send it back.
Yeah. And now, as I've told you, my sister is like one of your biggest fans, so Now she writes, and I think she also gets some enjoyment out of finding things that I didn't catch.
I know she's probably all excited. Ha ha! That one slipped through.
But she loves the work. But it's as many eyes as you can get on it. That there is so much value in that. So, and you're right. The traditional publishers are cutting back, and you do read the book that you just spent $15 on and find mistakes in them too. So.
I
But
always get a little excited. I'm like, yes, they have mistakes too.
I have another client who reacts the exact same way. It cracks me up. But yeah.
All right, so for someone who's kind of maybe they just finished their first manuscript and they had their beta readers go over it, how do you think, what's a good way to go about finding an editor? And are there any kind of like red flags maybe that people should be looking for that this person may not be that experienced or?
I have answered that with 3 things. Number 1, I think that you can look at your favorite authors, look in their books, and see if they credit their editor, like you do. Because if you like the writing and you think that it's been a clean, you look at a clean document, a clean book, then that says something. Places like Kindle boards, it has that yellow pages thing in there, and you can do a search and just a search for a copy editor or copy editing and pull up all the discussions that have maybe discussed people. And in their comments, a lot of people talk about their editor and promote their editor and give their information. I think in your search, kind of the first step is finding the names of some people to contact. But if an editor doesn't offer you a free sample, I wouldn't even consider them. I mean, I think on my website, I should probably change it. On my website, I say something about, for $25 or whatever, I'll give a sample edit. I'd never charge $25. It's there because you don't want to get deluged with people who are just kind of window shopping, I guess. I want people who are really serious about their work. But I've never done that. And I've won probably 95% of the work, so it's not anything I'm concerned about where I spend all my time doing sample edits and don't get business. If I did that, I'm probably not very good at my job to begin with. So I would say the key thing is the sample edit, going for people who will do that, and then communicating with them enough, primarily by email, because like you said, you got a lot of introverts. I'm one of those. Where that email communication is kind of key. You have to feel comfortable about it, and that you develop a relationship that way, even in those early stages of selection. And I've had people, kind of comment on that it's comfortable and you're getting along, and it's a gut choice between that and the price. Does it match your budget, all that business. But those are tangibles. There are intangibles that you just have to listen to your gut.
I would definitely tell people that it's good to get those sample edits done. I've told this story before, but when my first book, The Emperor's Edge, I was also trying to save money, and I found my Indonesian cover designer, for cheap, and I went on Kboards. I was like, does anybody have an editor they'll recommend? And I was trying to do it inexpensively. Also because, for one thing, I didn't have a lot of money then, and because, like I said, I thought my work was so fantastic that, it was pretty polished. It wasn't going to need anything except proofreading. But so I can't remember if it was, I think he was actually recommended by somebody on there, and he was an English teacher. And I'm like, well, that should do. And so I sent it to him, and I didn't really know about sample edits and asking for that kind of thing at the time. And so he did the whole manuscript for $200, which I thought that's a good deal. He's just proofreading. It shouldn't be that tough. And it was fairly clean, probably compared to some of the things editors get. But he had, I don't know what part of the world he was in. I assumed he was in America. But he changed all of the dialogue, and I knew my dialogue was fine. But he had semicolons in the dialogue, and it was just so crazy. He was changing so much stuff, and I was like, first I felt bad that this guy did that much work when it didn't need to be done. But here I am out $200. There was no point in even going through it and looking for anything because he just changed so much stuff. It was insane. I love English teachers, but that does not make you necessarily an editor.
No. And it goes back to, what are you editing? And when you're editing fiction, you kind of are doing a little bit of flexibility on all of those rules, right? You can't be so hard and fast about the rules of the proper sentence, and it's flavor. You're spicing up our language and giving somebody kind of an overall experience. And you have to admit I'm pretty flexible about grammar. I know you don't love all my...
I've got you trained now. You're doing good. You're doing well, excuse me.
Oh, see. Yeah, I don't.
I know I write very much like people talk, and there's differences in different styles of authors. My narrative is almost exactly like dialogue, so I know that that's just me. The joy that you like it or you don't.
And that's exactly right, but I like it. Let me just put it that way. I think the only time I really will jump out and try to make modifications of it is if I have stumbled out of the story because of something that was going on, and I think, why did that happen? And is there an easier way to keep me moving, forward? So that and the whole I, me thing, right? Lie, lay, that's a right word and wrong word. I, me is grammar, but again, you can fall out of the story if you use the grammar that is correct, but that doesn't feel good to the ear. So sometimes I'll change the I, me, but other times I'll leave it because I just think it's either the character or even, yeah, I guess it's more about the character so that it's comfortable.
Right, and there are a few things that are grammatically correct but just sound so weird because nobody says things this way.
Yeah.
Like, I think somebody was saying, like, what are you supposed to say? Like, with a stack of towels, like, where are the towels? Or these are they, I think was the correct thing to say instead of these are them. Like, nobody says that.
It's true, but it's right. That's a hard one. I do that.
But okay, so takeaway message for new writers, please get sample pages. And even if it's not something crazy, you just want to make sure you and the editor are a good fit.
Yeah, I mean, and from my perspective, I don't blanket price, right? As I said, I price based upon what happened when I did that sample edit. So that gives that person a chance to see my work, but it also gives me a chance to put a fair price on doing that work. So there's just so much value to it. I don't know how you don't do it.
All right, our discussion on semicolons made Adam want to ask a question. So let's see if you. Speaking of semicolons that are rules that are grammatically correct, are there some common grammar laws that are preached about that just aren't really that important in modern fiction?
Well, in my opinion, sure. And semicolons is one of them. I don't think a semicolon can be replaced by a comma. It's typically separating two full sentences, right? Unless you're talking lists. So because I think they seem so rigid and they scream kind of punctuation 101 or something, I don't know. It just seems abnormal to me to use them to any heavy degree. So I'll typically just put a period and create a whole separate sentence, particularly in dialogue. I prefer not to have them in dialogue. I've let them slip through if they're there, but I typically am not going to put them in dialogue. I think that's weird.
I actually think with semicolons specifically, that when you're learning the rules as a new writer, you kind of get excited about semicolons. Like, my mom just started writing fiction, and she sent me a story, and she had just been taught about semicolons, kind of the Strunk and White rules for when you use them, and I swear every third sentence had a semicolon. I was like, Mom, you text me all the time. You never use semicolons. You email me, what is this? And she's like, I love them. I just learned about them. I was like, take them out. You can only have 5 max in your story.
Oh, that is funny.
Do you have any thoughts on like ending with a preposition?
Oh, yes and no. Sometimes I just think it sounds totally weird, but no, I won't change it just because that's there. And I actually had a client go off in an email about that rule is totally bogus, and he went all the way back to the history of Latin and where the rule came from, and that it's not relevant. So you're allowed to end a sentence with a preposition. Okay.
All right, one more addition to that from Adam. He's getting awfully chatty there. I think his internet's doing okay. But as someone who didn't come up through the writing critique groups and stuff, you may not really have much of an opinion on it, but we're often told as writers not to use a lot of adverbs, that they weaken, in some cases there's a stronger verb that would be better. Do you have any thoughts on that? I guess some writers get so afraid to use them that they never put them in there.
Or they don't know that rule and they use wildly. Wildly. I mean, quickly and suddenly, and those sorts get so overused. And I think that if they do go back and study that, there are other ways to imply that that is happening as opposed to having to tell the reader he moved quickly to the door. I've had a couple of writers that I've just had to say, do a search for ly and just see how much you use it. And no, I don't think you need to, run away from them, but I do think they can be overused as I think it can also kind of be a weakness in the writing. I think that you should challenge yourself to steer clear up to a point.
That's a good tip, to search for the LYs in there, especially if you haven't thought about it before, if you're trying to self-edit and clean up a little bit.
Right, right.
So maybe moving on to maybe some other tips for authors who are, I know everybody should ideally hire an editor, but there's just going to be people who can't afford it. So I was wondering if you have any kind of self-editing tips like that where they can try on their own to do their best to clean up the manuscript.
I really think that it's that they can definitely do that. There are three things I would recommend. First of all, I'm often surprised that people don't run your basic spell check and grammar check. Maybe they ran it at one point during the process, but to me it's kind of the last thing they should do before it goes to an editor, because you shouldn't be asking your editor to fix your spelling when they're spell check, right? Now, homophones and things like that, that's different, but things just literally misspelled, that's an easy fix. I don't profess to like words grammar check. I think maybe steer clear of that a little bit unless you really can make a subjective decision about what it's pointing out. But books like, Chicago Manual of Style, which of course is the rule book that we're supposed to go by with a grain of salt, in my opinion, it's $35 a year for an online subscription, as opposed to the book. The book is a little daunting to try and find your rules, but there's a search feature on it, and you can find how to treat numbers and just the various basics that you can remind yourself about. So I think that's a good one to have. Garner's Modern American Usage, I think, is a good one to have. And there's one called the Copy Editor's Handbook. It's really written to a copy editor about how to edit for an author, but it just has some really good information in it. And those are just easy go-to things to double check, basic rules of thumb, and I think would be good for everybody to have.
I think also that, I know not everybody is actually a big fan of the critique groups. I think one of the criticisms is often that maybe you end up adopting someone else's voice or learning, ingraining rules that you shouldn't. But one of the things I found is that in any group like that, you'll have 2 or 3 people who are just awesome with grammar. And you'll actually just learn some of the rules from the things they tell you over and over.
Right.
Interesting in my experience, and it's probably just a very limited thing, I noticed that some of the really awesome grammar, really pretty sentence people weren't the best storytellers. So I don't know if maybe that goes back to the right brain, left brain thing, but those people are really good resources.
It's a balance.
All right. As far as other tips, I don't know if you've ever come across editing software. I know there's a couple out there. I think AutoCrit is one.
Crit is one. I kind of experimented with it at one point when I really thought people must be out there with a magic button when they were charging the $200 for the edit. And I think it could be a nice, handy tool for writers to kind of put it through the machinations of that, right, and get some feedback on it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It could only help. I don't think it could hurt. I don't know how much it costs.
I want to say it's like $50 or something, so it's not too expensive.
Yeah. No, I think I think that would be a good one. And then the different softwares, like you said, you write in Scrivener, right?
I do, and I was actually going to comment earlier when you were talking about typing or spelling errors that for some reason Scrivener seems to let a lot more things through than Word does.
Really?
So I'm lucky my beta readers are so snarky, they love to pounce on stuff. But what is it? Partially or specialty and speciality, like they're totally cool if you use the British version, they don't care. And I do that for some reason on that one particularly, but there's several of them that. So it might actually be worth it for people who do it in Scrivener to stick it in Word or something else before they send it off and just kind of skim through for the red squiggles.
Right. Yeah, or it's yeah, now that I know that about Scrivener, I would definitely suggest that. And you can do it based upon different dictionaries. Like I have written for British authors who want all of the British words as opposed to the American spelling. So you have to be careful about that too. So.
Yeah, the almost English language. It's universal, sort of.
Sort of, but not quite.
And Adam was chiming in that they tried software called Grammarly and White Smoke a few years ago, and that the problem was that it added too many commas, tons and tons of commas, he said.
I bet I would love that software.
It would love me.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, but still, even after using something like that, if you could, I would still try to get somebody to proofread it at least. When a lot of things change and get touched, particularly because we're dealing with electronic software, I would want human eyes on it. I wouldn't just take it for granted that fixed things. So.
It's definitely true that you can end up, I know that a lot of the times when I have something garbled that comes through, it's because I just edited that passage. Like in the process of fixing something or trying to improve it, that's where I didn't read through it again or something, and so that's where a lot of the goobers come from.
Even using track changes, in Word, when you have some, like if I send it back to you and you're doing the whole accept reject thing, you might accidentally hit accept when you meant reject, and words stay in there that you didn't know were staying in there because it pushes you on right to the next thing, right? It doesn't, you don't look at what just happened. You've moved on after you've made your selection. So things can get messed up in that process too.
Yeah, I'm waiting for something better to be invented. I don't think Pages is really any better. It's different.
It is different. I've had to work in it now for some other clients too, and the track changes thing I just don't think is as user friendly for visually seeing what's going on, And then,
what I wish with Word, and I was complaining, you're so patient to hear all my complaints and my comments when it's midnight, and I'm like snipping, like, that was perfectly wrong. What was wrong with that? What was wrong with that? But I hate that I can't see the original sentence sometimes when there's so many changes, and
right.
I feel like I need to see what was originally there before I just accept and say, okay. I'm like, well, let me see here. So sometimes, I'll end up rejecting it just because I need to see what was there first.
I'm going to look at something after we get off, and I think it would work. Up in Word, because I know you don't actually work in Word, but at this point, when you and I are going back, there's a thing up at the top that gives you a different view, and I tend to go to the one that says Final View because I want to see my changes. I want to read what I've done without all the stuff on the screen. But I think there might be one that says Original that you could go back to before the changes are on it. We'll have to look at that and see if you can. Because I can understand that with all that stuff on the screen, it's hard to get back to, well, what did I say, and do I like the new change, and is there a happy medium, in between?
Right, and actually Adam has a good point over here. He's saying that what he'll do is keep two versions of the manuscript open when he's going through the track changes, and just have the original over on the left maybe, and the one you're working on the right. And I guess I haven't really done that because I always work on my laptop. I just take it everywhere and do everything there, but now I'm thinking maybe for editing, because I do have a big screen iMac, and it's sad. It's in the kitchen, and all I use it is to look up recipes. So maybe for editing, I will use the big screen and have both of them open at once.
And I've started doing that as well with pulling up the one that I sent you, and then while I'm working on the one that you sent back. Because if you make a comment like that, I want to look back and see, well, where were we? And then where did we end up? So it is nice to have the second screen and have them side by side.
All right. He says he has 2 monitors, so I used to do that back in my gaming days. I'd have like the whole bank of computers open, but now I'm usually on the couch or something when I'm writing. But no, that seems like a good idea, and I may have to experiment with that in the future. So this is good. I'm getting tips too.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I guess that's probably getting close to the end. We've been chatting for a little while. I would just be curious, have you, now that you've been editing for indie authors now for, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 years,
Mhm.
have you seen any changes in the time you've been working with them, maybe related to editing or even trends in fiction or what they're doing when they're selling their books or?
Actually, I would say just it's more of an impression is that the need for editing is becoming more embraced, and the understanding of what that takes to get good editing has become more embraced. I feel like, and you would have maybe even speak to this more than I would, that self-publishing originally 5 years ago, 6 years ago, was, I think the impression was the people who self-publish are the ones who can't get a traditional publishing house to take their work, right? So it must not be as good. And I feel like that has really started to change because some really good indie authors have started to bubble up, and people are recognizing that they're quality, even though they're 99 cents or $4.99 and they're not $14.99. They're getting good, enjoyable books, and I think that what's really nice is that many of the readers are willing to put those reviews out there. Some of them even comment on the editing, which I find really funny, because to me, editing should be transparent. No one should be able to say it's good editing. But I think the reason they say that now is because with ebooks in the early days, they were bad, and they had a lot of quality issues. So to overcome that, it's nice that people are getting that word out there, and kind of elevating the reputation that the ebook has. So self-publishing doesn't mean second tier. I think that's changing, which is really good. Do you get that impression?
Oh, definitely. The authors have known for a while,
Yes.
but I think the readers are starting to actually want to support indie authors, and they'll look for indie authors. Some of them, I mean, some people still only want traditionally vetted stuff, or by the traditional publishers. But it's nice that that's changing, and quality manuscripts that are well edited are the thing that are going to help us.
That's right.
And one of the great things is that Amazon is not real obvious about whether or not a ebook is traditionally published. There's a little spot for publisher, but I think a lot of readers just read the blurb. If it looks good, if the cover's cool, they're going to check it out.
Yeah. No, I agree. I never look at that. The publisher doesn't, and a lot of times it's a made-up name anyway. Some authors create a publishing house name, and put it under that.
Yeah, I'm never sure how I feel about that. It's not something I've ever done. I mean, if it's your business name and you actually formed an LLC or something like that,
Right.
sure. But I'm like, you don't need to make anything up. Just leave that empty. All right, Adam's got one. He says he's got his publishing house name in there.
It's a
It's
TV.
okay, Adam. We'll still talk to you. But I want people to feel that they can be proud to be independent authors. That you want your stuff to be as professional. The packaging to kind of look just like a traditionally published book, so
Right.
that people won't be turned off by any homemade covers and that kind of thing. But
Right.
there are people who enjoy indie authors and will give it a try.
Right.
Um, I guess I have a question from Adam that I kind of missed earlier. We kind of talked about it, but if an author can only afford one editing service, which kind should they get, assuming they've already done beta readers and critique groups? With you, it sounds like you just kind of charge based on the samples, so you're not saying like I'm doing line editing, proofreading, or
If there's a mistake or something that needs to be fixed, I'm just going to fix it. How can you pass over? So I guess the answer to his question would be proofreading. You at a minimum want to know that there are no typos, missing words, double words, stuff like that. So if that's all you can afford, then do that. But even if, that's why I actually tell people I won't take on a proofreading job because, and say all I'm going to do is proofread, because I know I won't. I know if I come upon other stuff that I think can be improved, I'm just going to improve it. or what I consider improving it, and pointing out, the word usage and the fact that every other paragraph says in a moment, or some repeated phrase over and over. You tell them that. You have to. So, but proofreading would be my answer.
All right, sounds good. And I will point out that I have seen people who will be kind of professional, just proofreading in the sense of looking for typos and stuff, that you might be able to hire somebody for like $100 who's, assuming it's already been to the editor. So I would definitely make sure that the grammar, the copy editing kind of stuff is squared away. And then, if you get popular enough and you have readers following you, you might get some who will volunteer, or whether I appreciate it when people email me my typos. I mean, I'll go ahead and fix them, even though I'm like horrified that they got through.
I appreciate it too. Yeah, but I also, for someone to proof for $100, I still go back to the fact that I don't get it, because even reading for pleasure, I can't read that fast that is making that person money, unless they're just doing it because they love to do it. But they're not doing it as their business, because there's no way they put food on the table charging $100 to proofread an entire book. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think this is actually, I saw this in a romance writers forum, and I think it's another author who just enjoys reading in the genre and would read the books anyway, kind of thing. And I could see that if it's stuff you love to read and you're happy to read it anyway, and it's a hobby kind of at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, if you find those people, but that's a different thing from thinking that you should be able to find a proofreader for $100.
Right. I would say after you've gone through your editor, maybe you want a couple other people to.
Yeah, out of the goodness of their hearts with a $100 gift card.
I guess one question I kind of skimmed over, we kind of talked about it, but maybe I didn't want to ask it because I knew you would have examples from my manuscripts. What are some common mistakes that you see in manuscripts coming from new authors or even experienced authors that that people can watch out for?
I think, well, we've talked about lie, lay, and I, me. Those are real common. Curiously, I don't know that one of the kind of filters to put back on, or to put on when you go back and you reread your stuff, I think, is to watch dialogue tags. That some people get really carried away with dialogue tags, either by using he said, she said for every single line of dialogue, or getting all caught up in the ones that are descriptive, And I think descriptive ones can have a purpose, but I also think that you don't want to overuse them. So I would minimize them, and I would use he said, she said, and he asked more than I would use all the other ones.
No, he ejaculated as a from the 1800s. I think that was pretty common.
That would be a bad one.
I was going to say, unless you're writing romance, but then like, no, it'd be even worse if you're writing romance.
Yes. I'm trying. There are punctuation things. In fact, that pushback of after I've read and done a sample edit, if there are kind of typical punctuation errors that they're making, I'll point them out to them and say, you could clean that up before it comes back to me. And you're not paying me to do minutia. If they learn the rule, they can fix it and send it back to me, and I can move on. But sometimes they just don't want to, and I feel bad because they're paying me to sit there and do this sort of stuff throughout the entire manuscript, because it's a consistent error that they make. So I will try and point that out and let them take a stab at it.
All right, Adam reminded us to keep the show PG rating here.
I'm sure that was you, not me.
Yeah, you're very classy. It's always me. Kind of just before wrapping up, do you think that do you see more authors coming to you who are self-publishing overall? Is the business going up, I guess, or more and more authors going right to self-publishing and looking for an editor on their own?
I can't tell you the last one that I had that wasn't self-publishing. I had a couple. Gosh, it's been over a year where, they wrote their stuff and then they started all the query letters and all that business. I don't get that at all anymore. I format, as you know, a lot of my client stuff, and that's just what we do. I love it because I think it's so immediate too. I just can't imagine trying to go down the traditional path. I just think it's overwhelming when you have this as a vehicle to get your stuff out there. I don't see a downside to it, other than maybe marketing if you're not a marketer. But I don't understand, and the mystique I think is going away. So why put yourself through it? I don't get it.
Right. I think some people still do want that. They have the dream of seeing their book on the bookshelf at Barnes & Noble, however few Barnes & Nobles may be left by the time that happens.
Well, that's the point, right? I mean, all the bookstores, it's unfortunately a dying business. So think of the effort that you're putting into getting it out there like that, when you could spend 30 minutes and press a button and get it up on Amazon and everywhere else, and then it's in your court to market, and you're great at that, but a lot of people just don't want to, and or maybe intimidated or whatever, to put that responsibility on themselves. It's nice to think somebody else might handle it for you.
Adam says it's cheaper to buy a $5 Create Space author copy and leave it on the Barnes & Noble bookshelf when you go in.
Oopsie.
All right. Do you think, I think this is his last question maybe too, but do you think that the quality of work you're seeing overall has improved? Have authors really gotten, I guess, serious about treating this professionally before approaching you?
I think their approach is professional. I think their intentions are professional. I still think that some of them don't have the outlets to help them get that really polished work to me. Which, like I said, I'm okay with that because I like that level of doing the work. I don't want to get all of my work, I don't want it to be without some degree of complexity. I like to get involved at that level. So I can't say that I would look at it and say the quality of what I get has improved. The awareness of what's required maybe has improved.
Sure. Yeah, I think that people are always going to need to have an editor, and it's not like we're going to magically become great at having clean manuscripts overnight.
Right.
No matter how often you write, and if you write faster, it may be even you may have more things that slip through. So.
Yes, speed demon.
But and I think it's important too to remember that a lot of people are this is their first book, even that are listening to this podcast right now. I'm just so blasé about a new release, and I'm like, oh yeah, another book out. Hey, check it out, guys. Whatever. But it is important to just first find an editor that you can work with, and it does get easier down the road. I think a lot of people get intimidated with their first book, trying to find a good editor, find a cover designer. But once you do find those people, you kind of end up assembling a team, and then it does become smoother. So I guess that's something people can look forward to.
Right. I mean, you've done that, obviously, over the last couple of years. So you're speaking from your own personal experience, and that's great. You see a lot. Editors, obviously, is a big component of it. But finding the good cover artists, affordable good cover artists, is a huge challenge because it's just that's your face on Amazon, right? I mean, you have to get somebody to go, oh, and look at that little thing that's like this big on Amazon. But to look at that cover and be compelled, that's your point of entry. It happens long before they get inside and look at your story. So it's a big thing and can be daunting.
Yeah, definitely, especially if you write in, as I've complained about before, if you write fantasy and science fiction, it can be an extra challenge to find really cool cover art that you can afford to have done. You can't always just go to the stock photo sites because people don't dress up in medieval, whatever George R. Martin-esque clothing or science fiction clothing. But I guess that's the topic for the next show maybe, or a future show, cover art.
Cover art, yeah. Yeah.
All right, so last question for you. Are you taking on new clients now, and where can people find you online?
Yes, if I can fit them in between you. And hollowayhouse.me is my website, and my email address is right there. So people can email me or call me. My phone number's there too, but not many people call, which is kind of funny. I think it's that introvert thing a little
All
bit.
right,
The
we
ones,
don't. It's too personal.
yeah. No, I'm all about it. I'm all about email. The written word is very persuasive and effective. Gives you time to think about it.
All right, and we will put the link to your website in the show notes, so anybody who's checking this out on iTunes later on or on YouTube can just come on over to thewritingpodcast.com. Oh, Adam, is it /5? /5. And the show notes will be there with the link to your site. So thewritingpodcast.com/5. And I guess that's about all I have for you. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
And
It was fun to get this going.
awesome. Yeah, Shelly and I have talked through email for 4 years, and I've actually never seen her before or talked to her. I didn't know she had a phone number. So now we've been introduced.
That's right. That's right. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate this. This was fun.
All right. Thanks for coming on, and thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day.